Hello, my name's Thomas Callara, editor at Worn & Wound, and today we're going to be talking about the Seiko SSK001 GMT. Now this Seiko caused quite the stir in the middle of last year, being that it was an affordable GMT that came in a very familiar Seiko case. The SSK came out with 3 different models. You had the orange dial with gilt accents, then you had the blue dial with the Batman bezel configuration, and then you had this one, the black dial, the SSK001 GMT. As I said, it comes with a black dial, you have a black and gray split bezel and a red GMT hand. I tend to lean towards black dial stainless steel sport watches, so naturally the SSK001 was the one that I added to my collection. And if you don't believe me, I've written pretty extensively about my love for black dial stainless steel sport watches on the site, so go ahead and check that out. Now we can't talk about the SSK without talking about the SKX. So on my wrist here I have the SKX013. A lot of us can trace our start into the hobby with the SKX. Most people find themselves starting with the SKX007, but I started with the SKX013 because of its compact case size. There are definitely some resemblances here with the SKX and the SSK. You have these similar markers, you have the fun Seiko handset, you also have the curvy polished mid case, and also a crown at 4 o'clock. So overall there's some similarities here. You do see some of the design language from the Seiko SKX and the SSK, but there are some differences here. The bezel measures at 40.4 millimeters in width. And if you measure from the case sides, it measures slightly wider at 42 millimeters. You'll notice here that you have the polished case sides, drilled lugs, and you'll also have a set of crown guards accompanying the crown. They slope downwards, exposing the crown, so you have easy access to the crown. The SSK is on the thicker side of watches and measures about 14.5 millimeters. You'll also notice here that the crystal, the Hardlex crystal, sits flush against the bezel, so you can't blame the thickness on the crystal. It's actually because of the case back. The screw case back kind of protrudes. Now some watches have a lug design that angle downwards so that it passes the case back, but this is not the case for the SSK. As you'll notice, the lugs start and end right above the case back. The SSK is going to feel a little taller on the wrist. Now, despite the bigger proportions of the SSK, all of that is held in check by the 45.6 lug width. On my 6¼ inch wrist here, you'll notice that it wears fairly squarely on the wrist. So although you do feel every millimeter of the width and thickness, the lug width does make it manageable so that it wears pretty comfortable on the wrist. The SSK has a 24-hour split bezel. You notice that the top half is in black and the lower half is in this luster gray. In certain lights, the gray has this lightness to it, almost mirror-like quality. And in low light situations, it does appear as if it was black, as if the whole bezel is entirely black. So here we have a bi-directional bezel. The SSK uses a friction fit system, so you're not going to get the satisfying tactile click you would get with a dive bezel. It's more of a dull resistance that you get while rotating the bezel, but it's pretty easy considering that Seiko has a double row of knurling there, so it makes it easier to grip the bezel. It's fine by me. The friction bezel doesn't really bother me here. I would have liked it to have a 48 click bezel just so that I could have that tactile feeling. The other minor difference here is the crown system. On the SKX, you have a screw down crown, but here on the SSK, you have a push-pull crown with the first position moving clockwise, adjust the GMT hand, counterclockwise, adjust the date, and at the second position, it adjusts the main time. The dial has some distinct qualities as well, some obvious, some not so obvious. The markers here are slightly raised, and there are polished surrounds around each marker. The 12 o'clock marker has an upside down triangle, and the 6 o'clock and the 9 o'clock markers have a pill shape to them, and also they have this dash that's pointing towards the center of the dial. At 3 o'clock, we have this Cyclops date window. I like the Cyclops date window on this. I think it matches the boldness of the triangular marker at 12 and the pill markers at 6 and 9. If it wasn't there, then you would have this tiny naked date window, and I don't think it would have matched the aesthetic or would look visually pleasing to me as it does with the Cyclops here. The SSK is powered by Seiko's 4R34 movement. This is an update to their 4R caliber line. With this, you get 41 hours of power reserve, and then you get to see it through this exhibition case back here, which I think is a nice touch by Seiko. And with this movement, you have the addition of a GMT complication. The GMT hand moves here independently from the hour and minute hands, making this a collar or office style GMT. The bracelet isn't your jangly jubilee that you would find on the previous SKX models. The only way to describe the articulation of the bracelet is to compare it to some steering systems in some cars. The SKX bracelet is sort of like driving a Toyota Camry. The steering is kind of loose, kind of like the articulation on the SKX. But here it seems more solid. There's some resistance to the articulation, kind of like when you hop into a BMW. It's kind of, there's some resistance when you turn the steering wheel. Again, well-made bracelet, definitely an upgrade from where the SKX bracelet was. And the one final feature I appreciate about the SSK is the 24-hour scale in the Riot, a feature that will help easily track a second time zone if you're using the bezel to track a third time zone. Now, the SSK was my first foray into the GMT space, and I've found it very useful. Recently, we just had LVMH Watch Week, and I was able to track 3 separate time zones. My local time zone here in Brooklyn, GMT, or Greenwich Mean Time with the GMT hand, and Singapore as my third time zone. And that's where I like the Riot here, because I was able to track GMT fairly easily, and I was able to use the bezel for tracking Singapore time. All in all, the SSK GMT is a great affordable travel watch and is a home run from Seiko. For my full thoughts, check out my review at wornandwound.com. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Until next time.